Hello, I'm live. I'm going to read another chapter, or I finish a chapter which I finished a little earlier because my battery was empty. This is Time Out of Mind. It's the story about the life of Joan Grant as written by herself, published in 1956. And I have read chapters 1, 2 and 3, and I'm now in chapter 4, Sergeant's Mess. And it was a very amusing chapter, actually. She has the code of disobedience, or similar. Anyway, she's recounting her life when she was little. I think she's about 7 here. And I finished halfway through this. So she has gone and seen to meet what is it called? What is she called? The lady who does the washing. Anyway, she continues here. First thoughts suggested that girls often had to suffer starched drawers and frilly petticoats. The least that boys could do was to offer the resources of their money boxes. I think I would have let it go at that if the current nursery governess had not the curious foible of reading aloud to herself from the Bible during breakfast. I thought she was slightly dotty, but more mature judgment suggests that she did it in the hope that fragments of scripture would be digested with my porridge, and so shrive her for working in a heathen household where she had been strictly forbidden to give her pupil any religious instructions. That particular morning, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth suddenly broke through the haze of cold bacon fat at which I was staring. This seemed so opposite that it startled me. Was it a hint from God that I owed John a tooth? Or could I repay him as soon as possible with a shilling? The reader aloud must have been encouraged, because I suddenly paid attention, for she repeated even more somberly, "A tooth for a tooth." Do you understand, Joan? God had given me more than a hint. It was an order. I prodded my front teeth with a tentative tongue, and one wobbled a little. It was an unexpectedly sickening feeling, but fortunately quite definite. Patient tongue work during the day improved the situation. I tried the string and doorknob technique, but it was quite ineffective, for, like John, I could move faster than the door. I banged the tooth not very hard with the handle of a hairbrush. I stared at myself in a mirror and imagined so well that it made me red with indignation that a gang of hostile boys was chanting, "Cowardly, cowardly custard," at me. But even this did not rekindle a spark hot enough to fire a neglected powder keg of courage. Mother, no doubt driven frantic by 2 successive luncheons at which I slowly but determinedly chewed only on my front teeth, offered to pull it out for me. I refused, although reluctantly, for much as I wished to get it over, I did not feel sufficiently confident to face a drawn-out performance in her bathroom, while sterilized linen was dipped in antiseptic and mouthwash prepared, which I had to endure when she dealt with gumboils. In case her offer was repeated, I sought aid from Patrick, who performed the operation with a pair of pliers in the stokehole. In the jeweller's box, which had housed my Christmas brooch, wrapped in tissue paper and tied with my best hair ribbon, I presented my tooth to John. 20 years later, we met at a cocktail party. He was then an attaché at the British Embassy in Rome, and I had just written Winged Pharaoh. He showed me a small object attached to his watch chain. It was my tooth, mounted in gold. Very good. Now comes chapter 5, 1914. Through the golden summer of 1914 there blew the chill wind of an era's evening. But in the small circle which my memory lights, I remember only one anxiety. Could God be absent-minded as a grown-up, or worse, was he deaf? I wanted a pony, but only God could get me one. Mother, who had always been a martyr to what might happen, put me off with, "One day perhaps, darling, when you're bigger." Father was even less responsive. Years later he told me that he had always loathed horses, but had written to please his father, and was determined that I must never be allowed to make a similar sacrifice to filial piety. I had discovered that it was tactless to nag grown-ups. A seed firmly planted in their minds and occasionally watered with a wistful smile produced far better fruit. But apparently it was necessary to nag God, or why did my current governess make me say the same prayers every night? Words which had become so smooth by repetition that the pattern in them had been worn away. Our Father which art in heaven, I gabbled, and then, when I was private, went on to the serious matter of praying for a pony. Please God, I want a pony for my 7th birthday, which is on the 12th of April. I said loudly and clearly, a brown pony with a black mane and tail, small enough for me to get on without anyone helping, and large enough for me to still be able to ride when I'm taller. I want riding on and not a pulling a cart pony, and I will call it Ruby if it hasn't got a name already. But if it has the name, does not matter at all. What request could be more clear and concise? I gave him 6 whole weeks to make his arrangements. Surely that was long enough for him to inform my parents of what needed to be done. One morning I saw bricks and a barrow load of mortar outside the row of outhouses where tools and fertilizers and fruits were kept. One of them was being turned into a stable for Ruby. I was so sure of this that I knew exactly what the manager and the rack for her hay would be like, and I carefully avoided going next to the place, so as not to spoil the glorious moment when I first saw her in it. I kept on praying in case God did not realize that grown-ups are terribly apt to be forgetful or change their mind, although this did not seem really necessary after Mother told me that I was to have a wonderful and very expensive present for my birthday that was too large to be put with the others in the pillowcase at the foot of my bed. Hardly pausing to tear the paper off my other parcels, I ran downstairs. Father was in the hall. "Where is it?" I said, hugging him. I was so excited that I nearly said, "Where is Ruby?" which might have spoiled his pleasure in thinking it was a surprise. "It's in the dining room," he said. "We'll take it down to the beach directly after breakfast." A pony allowed indoors? Oh, how lovely of Father. But the sands would be perfect for me to learn to ride. But it was not a pony. It was a scale model of a Cunarder, which cost £50 and went by real steam. The grown-ups enjoyed playing with it when the sea was warm enough for them to bathe, but I never liked it. Soon after this, Father went to Paris to play in the Amateur Tennis Championship of France. Frenchmen call it the game Jeu de Paume. He took Mother, of course, and Marjorie and Iris, Wilson and Katie, which made it all the more disappointing that he did not take me. "We shall only be away about 10 days, and you are a bit too young for Paris," he said consolingly, and gave me the complete works of Jules Verne as a parting present, 4 volumes bound in brown leather. I always disliked being told I was too young for something. I thought I would enjoy doing that I was far too young for something I thought I would enjoy doing, so Father's kindly remark stung a bit. Had the French girl I sometimes dreamt about ever been to Paris, and if so, how old was she? I had seen her in a green velvet riding habit when she must have been a little older than Iris, but she was not in a city then. She was on a black horse galloping through a forest. There were several other riders with her and some hounds which were chasing a stag. Usually when I saw her she was younger than this, about 10 or 11. She lived in a house with a steep grey roof and faded green shutters in which most of the rooms were shut up. It was built on 3 sides of a courtyard, which had grass growing between the cobblestones. There were no other children, but she was quite happy and had a little carriage drawn by a pair of piebald ponies, which were not much larger than her enormous dog. She was allowed to drive them herself so long as she did not go near the village. There were certain people who had recently come to the village who must never find out that she still lived in the chateau. The night before my family came home, I had a long and complicated dream about her, of which I remembered very little until I dreamt it again many years later. But I remembered enough to know that she had been to Paris when she was 19. She was only there for a few weeks and spent them in a dungeon where she was so lonely that she tamed a rat for company. Even in the middle of the days there was only a greenish twilight, and the only time she saw the sun again was on her way to have her head cut off by the guillotine. It might have been a terrifying dream, but oddly enough it was not. It was rather comforting, because now I knew that beheading does not hurt at all. There was only a loud thud and a feeling of falling head over heels. The next minute she was jumping over a stream to join two men who were waiting for her on the other side of it. Two men whom she very much loved. Father lost the French championship by a stroke, quite literally. As if he had missed the ball, which was losing a hazard chase, he would have won the point and the match. It was a great pity, as otherwise he would have been champion of both countries, for 2 months later he won the gold racket at Lord's. Soon after they got home, Billy Greenfeld came to stay at Seacourt, with two friends who had also been rusticated from Oxford. Rusticated was not so bad as being sent down, which was the same as expelled, for it was only being sent away for the rest of the term. They had been to a fancy dress ball as ancient Britons in leopard skins and woad, which, for some incomprehensible reason, was considered indecent. I knew Billy already, and he had promised to marry me, which was very nice of him because he looked like a Greek god with curly yellow hair. I loved him devotedly and put flowers on his pillow, which were secret messages that I looked up in Marjorie's book, called The Language of Flowers, which came in useful when I had to remind him that he had forgotten to come to say good night to me. The other two were Willie Williams and Cyril Asquith. They had a tutor called Mr. Lindsay, a diffident young man who later became the master of Balliol. Billy used to make bets with Willie, giving him such long odds, £10 to a shilling, that they were always taken on. The first I remember is when they took me to buy sweets and saw a huge bunch of bananas hanging outside Mr. Jones' shop. Could Willie Williams eat them all in 24 hours? There were 250, and although Mother insisted that his stomach would be so distended that it would press on his heart and kill him, he managed to swallow the last one with 10 minutes in hand, and it didn't after playing 3 sets with Wilson to shake down his banana breakfast. After dinner, Father sometimes played the banjo, while Herbert Rubens, who was with his brother Poole, wrote musical comedies. Miss Hook of Holland and the Country Girl accompanied him on the piano, and the others sang. Father played the banjo beautifully, and had a band of 40 banjos when he was at King's, and took them to play at Oxford, and even in a concert hall in London. Sometimes I was allowed to come down to listen, but when not allowed, I could hear very comfortably lying on the floor of the music room gallery. The next bet was Willie Williams running 4 times to the ferry and back in 2 hours. The total distance was 16 miles, but he was good at marathon running and was pretty sure he could do it. I followed with Father in a new car, an open 2-seater Phoenix with very shiny brass headlamps which perched so high on its wheels that I had a splendid view over the heads of other spectators. Mother set up a first aid station at the gate at Seacourt, which was both the starting and the finishing post, with rolls of sticking plaster and boracic lint for blisters and bottles of liniment to rub on his legs. Iris came with us in the car, clutching a thermos of beef tea. The only time she got him to take any of it was so hot that he spat it out on the road, which I thought very robust of him, and a jar of chicken jelly which melted and shot onto the red leather seat until Father, who had a horror of anything sticky, noticed it and made her throw it into a hedge. Billy, who always wanted to lose his bets because Willie Williams was hard up, and it was the only way of making him accept money, ran with him part of the way, and Asquith and Lindsay coached him through megaphones from bicycles. By the 3rd lap, there were a lot of people watching, Not only people who had heard about it through us, but holiday visitors who had drifted up from the beach. Willie Williams was beginning to look rather pale and sweaty, but he was still going strong until he came into the home stretch, when suddenly he got cramp in the legs and fell down in front of the post office. Father jumped off the car and gave him brandy from a silver flask, waving aside Ira's offer of restorative soup. He held a stopwatch in front of Willie Williams' eyes and kept telling him that he only had another quarter of a mile to go and had still got 7 minutes. Get up, old boy, get up. You'll do it easily, urged Billy. On, shouted Mr. Lindsay. Oh, please get up, please, pleaded Iris, now almost in tears. She had turquoise blue eyes and cried easily, without them getting red. Willie Williams tottered to his feet, raised a gallant hand to acknowledge the cheering crowd, stumbled a few yards and fell flat on his face. Someone shouted, "Shame!" Other voices took up the cry, "Shame, leave the poor perisher alone, can't you? Shame, leave him alone." I suddenly realized they were really angry. The anger which makes you suddenly twice as tall and very much stronger. Billy ignored them, but I was frightened, for I knew the tingle that was pricking down their arms into their fists and the hot feeling in their spines. I felt quite wobbly with relief when Billy said at last, "Too bad, old chap," and helped Father lift the groaning man into the car. They were going to stay with us until the end of the long vacation, but on August the 4th the newspapers had huge headlines screaming, "War." Everybody said it would be over by Christmas, and talked as though killing Germans would be more fun than a day's hunting. Billy came to see me when I was in bed the night before he went away. He stared out of the window at the roses. That summer there were so many roses in the garden, and said, without looking at me, "This really is goodbye, Joanne." Then he kissed me. He knew he was going to be killed, and so did I. His death was even quicker than by guillotine. He was blown to bits. His mother sent me some lines from a poem his brother Julian wrote the night before he, too, was killed. The blackbird sings to him, "Brother, brother, if this be the last song you shall sing, sing well, for you may not sing another. Brother, sing well." Chapter 6 is entitled New World. So we are now in the First World War. Exciting.